Good morning. On behalf of the founding partners of the Edinburgh International Culture Summit, the British Council, the Edinburgh International Festival, the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government and the UK Government, welcome to this final digital discussion in advance of the Edinburgh International Culture Summit in August this year. Since August last year, the Summit and its partners have hosted 5 digital discussions involving 15 speakers from Lebanon, Ghana, Geneva via Uzbekistan, Italy, USA, and from many parts of the UK. Today we welcome 3 more inspiring speakers to guide us on a very different kind of conversation. A conversation entitled Creativity as a Skill. How do you teach it and why is it important? The why and the how of the creative future of young children. Before I ask Lord Parkinson, the Minister for the Arts in the UK Government, to introduce the speakers, I'd like to thank Anne, Maggie and Katya for their sharing their expertise in this conversation. This is the last digital event before the summit in August, which itself will have a rich online offering. So do please stay tuned to our invitations to join us between the 26th and the 28th of August. These conversations have been ably led since August last year by Fergus Linehan at the Edinburgh International Festival, the presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament, Alison Johnston, Angus Robertson, the Cabinet Secretary for Culture in the Scottish Government, and Scott MacDonald, the CEO of the British Council. And today I'm delighted to have the UK Minister for the Arts, Lord Parkinson, leading the conversation around creativity and skills. So over to Lord Parkinson. Thank you, Stephen, for your support. Thanks to all of your team at DCMS for the wonderful partnership they offer the summit, and enjoy the conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you for the invitation to be with you today. And I'd like to echo your warm words of welcome and thanks to our 3 panelists and indeed to everybody who's joining the call from all over the world today. It's a pleasure to be part of the conversation with you, and it is very much a conversation. Later on in our session, I'll be putting some of the questions raised by the audience to our panelists, so please do type away as questions occur to you throughout the session so that we can have that conversation as it goes on. The Edinburgh International Culture Summit has a special place amongst the gatherings of culture ministers around the world because it brings governments together with artists, with art leaders and with thinkers. As Arts Minister here in the UK, I know at first hand the value of bringing a wide range of perspectives together in a respectful and professional space to share expertise, to challenge each other and to learn through dialogue. So today's event is an example of just that, and I hope it gives you all a taste of what's to come at the summit itself in August, which I'm very much looking forward to being at. Today's question, as Jonathan says, is creativity as a skill. How do you teach it and why is it important? The reason we wanted to discuss this issue today, it lies in the G20 Culture Ministers Declaration on Culture. In July last year, as many of you will know, culture ministers from the world's largest economies met in Rome and agreed the first ever G20 Declaration on Culture. That declaration positions culture as a major engine for sustainable socio-economic recovery as the world responds to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. It identifies 5 key priorities: the protection of cultural heritage, the role of culture-based climate action, the importance of culture and creativity in education, the benefits of strengthening creative industries globally, and culture in digital transformation. The declaration bridges the gap between culture and other areas of public policy, such as finance, energy, and education. On education, it outlines not just how a cultural education can address current skills gaps, but it also how it can build new skills which are necessary for the future. And I think we'd all agree that creativity fosters innovation across many disciplines. The Declaration also recognises the role that cultural institutions such as museums, libraries and heritage sites have in nurturing education and in learning. I'm really keen that we all cherish and recognise culture for its educational value. Both a formal and informal cultural education should, of course, be accessible to everybody, and public museums, galleries and festivals all play a significant part in our lifelong learning, enabling people to develop continually and to develop their creativity. And that's why we're so excited about the educational impact of the Unboxed Festival, which we're holding across the UK this year. And I'm sure Maggie in particular will talk about Unboxed later. It's excellent to see that Indonesia has committed to a G20 Culture Ministers meeting this year, and will be building on the excellent work which was achieved in Italy. In the meantime, I'm very glad to use events like today's to widen the conversation from culture ministers and to bring in more perspectives and expertise so that we can engage with and build on the statements and aims outlined in the declaration. With that in mind, I think we've got the perfect panel for today's discussion. All three panelists have expertise and experience, not just in connecting culture and creativity with other disciplines, but embedding it in other parts of public life, be that education, science, or policymaking. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. Dr. Katia Pizzi is Director of the Italian Cultural Institute in London, and since 2004 has been the Senior Lecturer in Italian Studies at the Institute of Modern Languages Research in the School of Advanced Study at the University of London. Katia is the senior editor of the book series Cultural Memories and has published extensively on the literary culture, heritage and cultural memory of European cities, with special attention to Trieste and the Italian-Slovenian and Italian-Croatian borders. Dr. Maggie Adrian-Pocock is a board member for Unboxed, the festival of creativity across the UK, as well as a space scientist with a passion for presenting science to a general audience. She spent her career making novel, bespoke instrumentation in both industrial and academic environments. Maggie is the founder of Science Innovation Limited, through which she conducts public engagement activities, shares her love of space, and encourages underrepresented communities to take up STEAM subjects, that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. An author, TV presenter, and co-host of The Sky at Night, Maggie recently won the Institute of Physics Gold Medal for exceptional services to science education and physics communication, and is president of the British Science Association. And finally, Professor Anne Bamford is the Strategic Director of Education, Skills and Culture for the City of London. Anne has been recognised nationally and internationally for her research in education, emerging literacies, and visual communication. She's an expert in the international dimension of education through her research and has pursued issues of creativity, innovation, social impact, and equity and diversity. Anne has conducted major national impact and evaluation studies for the governments of Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Iceland, Hong Kong, and Norway. So without further ado, let's get the discussion started. And I think, Anne, we're going to begin with remarks from you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lord Parkinson. I wanted to start by sort of taking us a little bit back in exactly what creativity is, and then sort of propose some of the things we need to think about when we're looking at it as a skill and how education responds to it. So creativity as a skill is both a process skill, so it's a kind of skill in process, it's a series of actions. It also is, though, some qualities people have, traits that we can develop. So they're things that are contained within the person that we're able to grow and develop as a skill. And it's also an end product. So creativity can result in products that can then be commercialized or bring economic value through the process. And what we're also increasingly seeing is that the interplay of those three things, so the process of creativity, the skills that are associated with that process, the personality or the development of qualities within the individual that promote their responses in a more creative way, and also the products that result from those combination of the process and those qualities is resulting in economically commercial products that not just hard copy products, not just things that are solid products like a sculpture, but also ways of thinking, ways of solving complex challenges, and ways of dealing with the society. And Lord Parkinson mentioned in his introduction the response, and the G20's picked up in their work, the response to the pandemic and how that's positioned us, and the importance of creativity. And just as an example of that, for example, the BBC surveyed more than 50,000 people around what creativity and engagement, particularly with the arts, resulted in terms of their own well-being and satisfaction during that quite difficult period for people. And it was found that it gave, if you had direct involvement, particularly if you were engaging in collaborative creativity, in hands-on creativity, that had a really marked impact. But their research also found that if you vicariously experienced creativity by engaging with the broader arts and cultural world, even through digital media, through television, through other forms, it also had that same balanced impact on well-being and creativity. And this comes to the heart of what Plato and Aristotle argued about, which is Plato believed that you would get creativity simply by being exposed to the arts, whereas Aristotle said you'll actually get it when you're really doing the arts things yourselves. And in fact, they were both a bit right in terms of what seems to be the case. Now, one of the perhaps salient things when we look at this in terms of education, a few points to think about, is first of all, it has to be a lifelong endeavour. You can't sort of dose up young children with this creative dispositions and creative process and expect it to last forever. It does have to be something we need to continue to do. It's something that businesses need to develop within their workforce. It's something we need to develop at all ages and in all dimensions of society. The other aspect that came through really clearly when I did the UNESCO work looking at this in terms of education for all was that the creativity, if it's poorly taught or if education stifles creativity, it doesn't just have a sort of nil effect on creativity, it actually has a negative effect. During that research, I found that 28% of education programs being offered around the world actually resulted in a reduction in a child's creativity. So we have to be mindful that when we're providing education, the education must stimulate creative process and dispositions, and at the same time not adversely act to actually stifle them. And I think this is a really important challenge as we look forward to the future of education as well. And I want to just finish in this introductory part by posing as well the importance of creativity as part of what we refer to as fusion or fusion skills. And this is the idea that everybody has a sort of T-shaped profile, that along the top of their profile, no matter what job they do or what education and learning they're doing, they have a number of skills that they can apply to that. These skills are like oral communication, collaboration, initiative, problem solving. But creativity is an interesting one because it is a specific skill, but it's also an unlocking skill to those other fusion skills that form the top of that T. In the vertical side of the T, what you start to have are the specialisms. And regardless of what the specialism is, these strong fusion skills across the top help to make sense of those specialisms. Traditionally, people would have one specialism throughout their lives. Now we know at a bare minimum, the average person has around 9 specialisms. So in fact, they're more like a comb shape than a T shape because they have a number of specialisms, but what ties it together are those fusion skills. And within those fusion skills, creativity is both one of the skills, but also a facilitating process to develop the other skills, such as problem solving, resilience, and so on. So I'll leave it there just because I'm aware of the sort of time, but I wanted to just put that as a sort of proposition to guide our debate.
Smashing. Thank you, Anne. That's an excellent way to start, not least with reconciling the Aristotelian and Platonic conceptions. Fantastic. Thank you. Maggie, I think we're coming to you next.
I was watching with fascination sort of the Rome Declaration of the G20 Ministers of Culture, so leaders across the world coming together in the iconic Colosseum to discuss the challenges that culture is facing in the aftermath of COVID. Now, I'm currently speaking to you from another cultural icon. I'm speaking to you from the Royal Palace in Sweden. And I'm here to take place in a panel talking about dyslexia and looking at dyslexic strengths. Now, dyslexic strengths come in a wide range of forms, but it's communication, it's imaging, it's visualizing, it's exploring, connecting, and reasoning. Now, all of these are sort of traits of creativity. And this is creativity in a nutshell. Now, before I want to talk about sort of how we teach creativity, I really want to get to the why. And first of all, I think, as Anne just said, being involved in creative endeavors, even watching people involved in creative endeavors, is just a wonderful thing to do. It's exhilarating. It sort of makes the heart beat faster. So that's something that everybody should have access to. Also, it's effective. By using creative skills, we take on the challenges of the world and solve them. And if we look at the sort of future of work, we need more of these creative skills. One of the things I'm discussing here at the Dyslexic Summit is a sort of how many dyslexics have these creative skills and how we need to get them into the workforce and sort of overcoming some of the challenges with spelling and other things that we dyslexics face. So, okay, that's the why, but how do we teach it? Well, I think the challenge is taking creativity out of the box. Creativity is still associated with sort of high art and culture, but creativity is an everyday endeavor. It's something that everybody does. And I think we need to get that out there. So when we teach creativity, we must show that you do creativity at home, you do creativity on the way to school, on late, let's take the shortcut. All these are sort of creative inputs that we need to show. Next, we also need to sort of move away from the idea of, over here, if you're creative, you go into the arts, and if you're logical, you go into the sciences. Of course, the two merge together. Over the past 14 years, I've spoken to about 350,000 school kids, trying to get them excited about STEM. But now my lexicon is sort of moved on. I'm not talking about science, technology, engineering, and maths. I'm talking about STEAM, and I'm going to get this wrong because I'm dyslexic. But putting the arts in there as well. Because when we sort of divide them up, we limit ourselves. And so, as it was very kindly mentioned, I sit on the board of Unboxed, and Unboxed is celebrating creativity throughout the UK. And so it's quite nice to sort of see this merging of sort of science and technology. Before coming out to Stockholm in Sweden, I was out in Belfast, actually in Londonderry, over the weekend. And we had a lot of fun as part of an opening event for Unboxed, Our Place in Space. And we were looking at sort of astronomy. And actually part of a new festival event called Our Place in Space. And for this, there's a wonderful trail of 10 kilometers, and you sort of follow this trail around, and you look at the relative distances between the planets and the relative sizes of the planets. So the sun is huge, and then the Earth is sort of a little bit diddy, and Jupiter's about the size of a baseball. And you can walk along with an app, hearing about these planets. And creativity is so much in science. If you look at a subject like astronomy started with people looking into the night sky and seeing sort of the stars and creating stories about them. Then we evolved. We thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Then the sun was the center of the universe. Each time taking another creative leap. But now we know we live in a galaxy called the Milky Way. The Milky Way galaxy contains 300 billion stars, and each one of those stars is a sun like our sun. And now we're detecting planets going around those stars. It takes creativity to develop the science to be able to do this. And so that's what we need to teach kids, that creativity is part of our everyday lives, and it gives us the challenges of the future. I work in television, as was mentioned, and I'm trying to pitch an idea at the moment called Innovation Nation. Innovation Nation is everyday solutions to big global problems. I see this in my everyday life. I sit on the board of Young Engineer of Britain, and I see kids coming up with solutions to the challenges we face. So let's throw it open to everybody. Let everybody know that there's an inner creative in them, and that they can sort of participate and actually help us sort of solve these global problems. So it's wonderful being part of Unbox, where we're merging, we're getting rid of that dichotomy between science and arts, merging them together and creating something truly magical. I'm looking forward to the further discussions. Thank you very much.
Maggie, thank you very much indeed. A fantastic exposition of the need to remove that dichotomy between the arts and sciences, and explaining the role of creativity in discovery and innovation. Katya, we come next to you. Good morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning. And let me first begin by saying how deeply honored I am to have been invited to be part of this stimulating discussion and to sit on a panel with such illustrious speakers. And I shall introduce my discussion by saying a few words on what I do as a way of addressing, first of all, the point about accessibility to art, culture, and creativity. Now, the Italian Cultural Institute in London exists to promote Italian culture and language, and in so doing, to cultivate and deepen cultural diplomatic links between the United Kingdom and Italy. Access to all our content, including digital and in print, is open and free of charge. We are, in other words, a fully accessible cultural space. Our activities are both underpinned by creativity and are designed to nurture creativity. We exist, in other words, in a translational space between cultures, a space designed for the expression and flourishing of intercultural meaning. And in fact, the notion of found in translation, which is something I've invented, paraphrasing its negative, pejorative counterpart, lost in translation, pretty much describes and sums up my efforts as director of the Italian Culture Institute in London. So it is on the premises of building environments of shared culture and feeling that we can aspire to genuine and creative thinking in our societies. Creativity, in fact, is eminently social, thriving on shared experience. If you and I create a communicative space where translational culture can flourish, there we have a constitution of creativity and a foundation of human identity. The great historian Aby Warburg invented the notion of Denkraum, that is to say, the space of reflection and contemplation required in order to appreciate our own culture and the culture of others. Typically, we fetishize creativity as the exclusive and unique product of talent. And of course, society needs gifted individuals to blaze a trail and stand as role models for the young. But let us not forget, for example, the bottega of the Italian Rinascimento. In this environment, a co-producing craftsmanship was the driving force of creativity. That team effort was hugely and collectively creative. And I shall return a little later on in my exposition to creativity as is understood in Italy. But I'd like to address briefly the point about what is meant by creativity as a skill. So on these premises, I'd like to question whether we should be thinking of creativity as a skill at all. In my experience, in fact, creativity seems less like a discrete quantity, but rather an environment. It's something that we nurture as a habitus, a mode of being within our social and educational environment, something conducive to creative thinking and creative modus operandi, a bit like Anne was mentioning earlier. Creativity does consist of unpredictability, of coming up with new forms of seeing and understanding, of deviations from the norm that open up new perspectives and new vistas. However, can you teach a machine to be creative? Now, that's an interesting question. And of course, there are currently explorations in several fields to assess whether AI can come up with creative solutions. So far, however, it seems that the answer is in the negative. That is because creativity ultimately doesn't consist of repetition and data recall, but rather of a form of invention. The etymology of the noun invention comes from the Latin invenire, which means to come up something, to discover, to find something new. And so creativity is a process where the agent is changed through the interaction by which they transform the environment for themselves and for others. A machine cannot do that, not yet, at least. So, and to the final point about the importance of creativity to an individual's life and the wider workforce and the economy, I'd like to start with a joke by saying that the Italian phrenologist Cesare Lombroso maintained that there was an abundance of genius and madness in Italy, whereas in Britain, the weather was too bad for anyone to be creative. Now, in one respect alone, Lombroso was right. Italy scores highly in the creative stakes. Our design, our fashion, our engineering are the most beautiful and creative in the world. In Italy, creativity is considered to be part and parcel of both our artistic and our genetic heritage, indeed. Beauty seems to saturate everything we do and everything we are. Now, at least since the Renaissance, Italy has been in the position, historically, to value creativity highly in society. For example, in the 15th century, the Florentine state placed huge emphasis on originality in art, because this very principle of creativity gave them a diplomatic edge, contributing to the soft power of the Florentines, navigating the choppy geopolitical waters of the time. By the same token, great artists like Raffaello, of which we have this wonderful exhibition at the National Gallery now, Raffaello was invited to work in Rome in order to reinforce the power politics of the Pope. So, in other words, I would like to suggest that Italian culture has always valued innovation, has put it at the core of its identity, including its political and economic identity, and has rewarded it accordingly throughout its history. So, to conclude this brief exposition, I'll reiterate that creativity can only be achieved by sustained cultural dialogues. And I'd like to include internationalization and valuing frameworks of translational innovation as part and parcel of this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Katja. That was splendid and particularly pertinent. I'm just back from Venice at the Biennale, where I've obviously been enjoying not just Italian culture, but global culture, and seeing people from all around the world having fruitful discussions, and indeed getting a glimpse of the point you made about the difference between British and Italian weather. I'm sure there's all three of those opening expositions have provoked lots of questions, and while people are typing their questions away, and a reminder, you can submit them throughout. Please do keep putting them in so that we can put them to our three panelists. But I'll start off with a couple of questions of my own, if I may. Obviously, I became Arts Minister in the UK in October, towards the end of the pandemic. So I've seen the creative and innovative ways that people across the creative industries and the cultural sectors have responded to the challenges of the pandemic, as well as some of the beneficial things, if I can call them that, the changed ways of working that the pandemic have provoked us. As we respond to the effects of pandemic across society more widely, how can arts and cultural institutions contribute to the rebuilding of society and to social spaces? Anne, should we come to you first?
Thank you. I think it's very much about putting learning and creativity and skills at the center of those cultural institutions, because I think that we too often see the cultural institution as only being the bit that becomes a sort of public part of it. So the museum only being about the exhibition, the theatre being only about the performance. And what we're actually ignoring is that there's a huge amount of that, of the iceberg behind the surfaces, and that is a powerhouse of developing capacities in these areas of creativity, innovation, and so on. And we're sort of almost not fully realizing the value that we have within those cultural and creative institutions. And those values are in the areas of, for example, promoting well-being and community cohesion, about enhanced diversity. I was glad to hear Maggie refer to, for example, the work she's doing with dyslexia. As a dyslexic person myself, it's the capability to really expand alternate forms of thinking at this time. And we've seen as well that the businesses, the commercial enterprises during this time have equally suffered. And one of the things that they've realized is that they thought their workforce had resilience, had these fusion skills, but in fact they didn't when they were forced into a situation of having to react to them in a very rapid way. Less than a third of the people in the companies were able to pivot and react in a creative and innovative way to these sorts of situations. So I think that the cultural institutions have a real powerhouse to add into the mix. The things that were being described by Katya in terms of the translation, the lessons, the political influence. I think these things are really important features for helping us to be successful moving forward. And it's also, I think, a time of great questioning where people are saying, you know, what are we doing with education? What are we doing with the environment? What are we doing with, social equality within our society? And those sorts of big questions, those difficult, challenging questions, need all sorts of thinking. It needs scientific thinking, artistic thinking. I'd back your show, Maggie, because I think it also, it's the way that we can problem solve sometimes very simple ways to quite complex issues. And I think there's a huge opportunity if we unlock that potential.
Thank you very much. You're completely right about the iceberg effect of cultural institutions. I think as places have faced the challenges of the pandemic, people have appreciated just how much work and organisation goes on to making that happen. And of course, everybody's so missed those experiences during lockdown. I think there's a great yearning for culture and for creativity as it opens up again. Katya, should we come to you next on that? How can cultural institutions help rebuild and recover as we bounce back from COVID?
Well, I'd like to echo Anne's words about the notion that knowledge really is universal. So we need sort of the whole of knowledge, the whole of the fields working together to unlock creativity. It's not just something that we can come at from one specific angle, but we really need to broaden the field and to bring all the disciplines together and to create a conducive space for creativity. Now, as I said, I think the great importance of places as the Italian Cultural Institute that I lead and where I work is to create a social space which is fully accessible, fully open, free of charge for the unlocking of creativity, for people to come together and to experience culture, but also to exchange forms of culture in a translational manner, as I described. Obviously, during the pandemic, like everyone else, we've been relying a lot on digital forms of sharing. We've been relying a lot on printing, and this is one of the aspects that is sometimes overlooked of the activities that we do. We are, of course, a cultural space where people come together for events, but we also print a lot of printed material, which can help, it has helped and sustained the education of our children with books, with comics, with all sorts of material that has, really sort of taken us through and made us resilient during the pandemic. But I'd like to really emphasize and reiterate the idea that culture and creativity are social, even in conviviality, even in the not only in the cultural events that we mount and we put up at the Italian Cultural Institute, but also in the networking that follows and in the drinks that follow. That is a form of creativity that is unlocked, and it's so very important. And it's something that we really rely upon to, moving forward.
Thank you. And Maggie, what do you think cultural institutions should be doing to help us to bounce back from COVID?
So I think cultural institutions have been playing a major role during COVID. I think lots of plans to go and put exhibits online have been accelerated during COVID, which has to be a good thing. I think one of the important things is the notion that Katya was talking about, that shared culture. I think it's one of the challenges we face is that some people think, oh, culture isn't for me, culture is for the others. I'm not part of that. And I think by looking across the world and looking at sort of different cultural experiences from across the world, no matter where you come from, there is sort of a cultural experience for you. So I think that's one of the things that online does. It gives us access to many, many different sort of cultural experiences as well, all at once. And I think one of the that's one of my sort of the challenges I think that I want to take on, that sort of getting those cultural experiences out to everyone. And by working on Unboxed, I think we're getting closer to that. With Unboxed, we're celebrating sort of 10 different events across the UK, from a sort of a recommissioning an old oil rig into a sort of eco play area, to a sort of our place in space, which I was visiting on Sunday, where we had, I think, 716 people all dressed up as astronauts to sort of break a Guinness Book of Records. So it's just trying to find the right hooks to get everybody involved. And also with Unbox, one of the things we're doing is, rather than going sort of London and sort of a Cardiff and sort of the big cultural centres, we're also trying to go to sort of small places where, and when I go into these places, people are saying, "Oh, we're just so glad you came here," because they feel that they're sort of off the cultural map. And so by bringing stuff to their location, they are just so excited about it, and everybody's sort of chipping in and, hey, you've got to come and see this. So I think museums, I think, have been pushing it out in the right direction, getting more online. But I think we still do face the challenge of getting everybody involved, because I think there's still quite a large population out there that thinks, oh, culture, that's just not for me. And culture has to be for everyone.
Absolutely. I can see we've got some good questions coming in, but just to sort of pick up that point, and actually a remark you made in your opening exposition, Maggie, about you said that everybody should have access to creativity and culture, and that's very much a priority for us here at DCMS. How can we do that, as you say? Things like Unboxed that are taking creativity and exciting projects to parts of the country that perhaps haven't seen them before, to spark that interest and passion in people. But what else can we do to make sure that everybody has access to the creativity and the stimuli that they need? Maggie, do you want to sort of should we start with you and then come to the others?
Oh, sorry. So I think it is a sort of getting out people access to it and letting them know it's available. There are some fantastic resources online. When I was doing homeschooling with my daughter, it was sort of just sort of tapping in, just, oh my goodness, we can do a tour of the British Museum. Yeah, let's go in. And so there are these wonderful resources, but not everybody's getting into them. And I think it is, to a certain extent, a sales pitch, almost like a PR campaign. And that's why I think Unbox is so strong, by going to these different areas. Because the people come along and they'll say, oh yeah, this is a cultural activity. Like, oh, this is culture, but this is fun. And so I think people find it surprising. So I think it is just sort of opening up to all and just letting people know what's available and speaking in the language of the everyday. As a science communicator, science ideas can seem incredibly complicated. And when I go up to someone and say I'm a scientist, you can see the colour drain from their face. Oh no! But if you can put it in sort of emotive, and visual, if you can create a story behind it, I think then more people get involved and they know that it's for them as well.
Anne, do you want to say anything on broadening access to creativity?
I think it's sort of being touched on, but I'd like to broaden out this point about providing space for creativity, because I think that it is physical space. It's always wonderful, for example, when I go to the Barbican and I see in their foyer meeting of people from all different backgrounds doing all different sorts of things, using that space for creative endeavour. And I think that that's brilliant. So I think there is something about a physical space, but I also think it's about virtual spaces. And I don't mean just online spaces. What I mean is space within the workplace, within the working day, within our lives, within the education curriculum. Because I think one of the things that we've seen is that space has been reduced and reduced and reduced over the years. And one of the advantages or the positives of that period of the pandemic was people reclaimed some of that space. So children reclaimed play space where they could be creative. And there was some incredible stuff that children did when they had the space to be creative. There were absolutely mind-blowing things. I met one young Japanese student who had actually started a whole global campaign around, what we could do for the climate and how we could get, better environmental education into schools. And that was given the creativity of the time that was provided. We've seen with workplaces that in trying to entice their workers back into the office, one of the things they've had to really look at is physical creative space, but also time to be more creative within the confines of what's traditionally being called work. So trying to create a space that's between play and work for the adults to entice them to come back in, to provide a cultural magnet to encourage people to want to return, to get all of those experiences, that there is a richness around when you put people in a collaborative space together. So I think the really unlocking thing is about space, but it's not just about physical space. It's about making sure we're taking culture to lots of spaces, that culture is appearing in all sorts of spaces, but also that we're allowing space of time, space to think, space to have different ideas, space to be able to have collaborations and discussions to solve these complex problems.
Thank you. Yeah. And Katja.
Yes, thank you. And I do believe very strongly in space, in creating space of creativity. And of course, this is physical or virtual space, but also head space. Creating a space which is a relaxed, stress-free mode where people can be creative. You cannot be creative if you're stressed, or if you're fearful, or if you're hungry, or if you're worried, if you don't feel wanted. So I would like really to reiterate the full accessibility and the full openness of the Italian Cultural Institute as a space, a creative space, not just for Italians, but for everyone. We're there not just to serve the Italian community, but of course everyone, and to sort of explore the links between the culture, the British culture and Italian culture. The other thing I would like to point out, and it's a great resource of this country, is the full accessibility and the free of charge accessibility of museums and art galleries. And it's something that Maggie touched upon. Now, this is an incredible resource. It can't be taken for granted in other countries where you have to actually pay a lot of money to go and see the national treasures. In this country, you can go to the British Museum for free, and it's a wonderful resource for the entire nation. And, and it's a sort of a leading model for other nations of the world.
Thank you. Yes, it's something we're very proud of, and I know that the institutions benefit from having that range of people that come for a range of different experiences, and make repeat visits as well. There's always something to discover, particularly in places like the British Museum. You can go 100 times and see something new on each occasion. We've got some good questions coming in from the audience, so I want to put those and encourage people to keep sending them in. But Veronica Jane Lynch asks about global perspectives and looking at education systems around the world. She asks, is there a model that you'd highlight as being truly creative and STEAM driven as a basic concept for children? Katja, should we start with you on sort of international perspectives? Where in the world is getting this right, or where can we all learn from?
Well, I mean, there are, of course, different educational models, but we've already spoken about the idea of specialism as something, as Anne put forward, as a sort of as creativity, as something that is a fusion skill that can enable various types of specialism. That the idea of specializing completely really early in life is probably not terribly conducive to creativity in ultimately. I think the idea of my background is that of a sort of baccalaureate style educational model, where students are exposed to many disciplines and many fields of study, and they don't actually specialize until a little bit later in their educational progress, is, for me, perhaps a better model to unlock creativity in the young. and also to be exposed to foreign languages. I'm sorry, I'm biased about this because I'm a teacher and lecturer of in foreign language, but I do endorse and I want to really speak very, very strongly for the introduction of foreign language and foreign culture teaching in our schools, because I think exposition to other cultures and other identities, other ways of living is absolutely integral to the to the education of any individual. And the earlier you do that, as we know, a language, the earlier you learn a language, the better, you're able to pick it up and to produce the right sounds and to, to speak it, credibly. So it's, I would have thought that, yes, the idea of specialism or too early a specialism or too much testing or too much, early forms of progressions can sometimes be a deterrent to the development of a fully educated individual and a creative individual as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point about language. Often, not just in unlocking, cultures from around the world, but often other languages have words for concepts that just don't exist in our own native tongues. It's important to sort of come across those new concepts. Maggie, do you want to say something about global perspectives? Particularly sitting in Sweden at the moment.
Yes. Well, as it happens, I think it's. The Scandinavian countries are often thought to be sort of perhaps ahead of the UK in some of these ideas. I think kids in the Scandinavian countries, they start school later. There's less sort of prepping for exams. I think they're given the space, as both Anne and Katia has mentioned, they're given the space to explore ideas. And from what I find, from sort of going out and speaking to so many school kids are creative. They have ideas. I go to a kid and I speak about space and astronomy, and they say, well, why can't we have anti-gravity boots? And I look and think, I don't know why we can't have anti-gravity boots. But I think when we focus kids too much on a curriculum, sort of ticking boxes, I think we take the creativity out of them. I remember a few years ago interviewing someone and sort of asking them a question, and they said, well, that's not a curriculum, I can't cover it. I said, no, we want you to think beyond the curriculum, come up with ideas. And so I think this is why we need sort of, to give, I think it is talking about that space, to give them the headspace to explore ideas and to let them know that their ideas count and they mean something. So I think that's what we need more of.
Fantastic, thank you. And Anne, global perspectives, where what can we learn from?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's both global and local perspectives. And I wanted to just pick up on a point too that Katja made around language, because I think it's important to have our spoken language, but we also have to realize that increasingly we're relying on visual languages, visual literacy, that we're also relying on dramatic languages. You see the growth of things like TikTok and Instagram, which have both positives and negatives, but where they're very heavily based around cultural languages, and with an S, multiple languages of ways of expressing meaning. And these things becoming more mainstreamed in how we operate and function. So I think the importance of languages is key. There are places, both countries and cities, that have taken creativity very seriously. And I think that they need to be sort of almost called out or, a shout out, because they're doing incredible things. So places like Bandung in Indonesia, where they're trying to look at this as a way of reforming the whole system and connecting it with ecology and connecting it with the environment they're in, working with businesses, working with education and schools. You've got the state of California doing amazing things with creativity, technology and sciences, and really centering it around creative exploration across the fusion. And I'm using that rather than multidisciplinary, because the idea of discrete disciplines is starting to disappear into this fusion of requiring human knowledge and human skills to apply itself across a whole range of things, regardless of discipline almost. You've got South Korea, who took it very seriously from a policy and government point of view and introduced a whole ministry, a whole area of work, the Korean Arts and Culture Service, to really take this very seriously and say this has to be, we want to completely reform not just our education system, but our economy. And you've seen that then in the rise of things like K-pop and the income generation to the country by their cultural output. So they took it in a very serious policy, systematic way. You also have, Maggie mentioned the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries, where you see, for example, both Iceland and Finland, where creativity is a core of how they operate. And particularly in the first years of schooling, it's almost half of the time that children are engaging in the arts, cultural and creative activity. And that volume of time given up, that space in the day given up to this sort of work and the benefits that it's netting. In Iceland, I think it's great what they've done in terms of connecting what happens in education in school with what's happening outside of education. An interesting phenomenon, for example, in New York at the moment, is that there's a problem with children attending school, but there's not a problem with children attending after school and out of school cultural and creative activities. And so what is it that the school's not doing that those out of school cultural and creative activities are doing? So there's places all over the world where these reforms are happening, and it's exciting, it's netting good results, and we just have to make it available to all people and making sure that everybody across the society within a small town are getting the benefits of that experience.
Fantastic. Thank you. Lots of good examples from all over the world, I think, underlining the importance of having discussions like this, bringing in perspectives from all across the globe. Hayley Rains has asked a question. We've touched on dyslexia, but she asks whether the panel feels that alternative forms of thinking, neurodiversity and the strengths that they bring are appropriately welcomed and integrated within formal educational settings, and indeed more widely, can those models be adapted to businesses and policy making to improve creativity in the workplace? Anne, should we start with you on that?
Yes, well, I mean, I think it certainly there is a change afoot where we're seeing that people with a whole range of diversities, including neurodiversity, are actually huge assets within an organization and within thinking, because we need different types of people collaborating together to solve these wicked issues that we're confronted with. And what has gone from being a disadvantage, it certainly was when I was trying to pass dictation tests when I was 10 years old, has become a distinct advantage, because as a fusionista, as someone with rich fusion skills, having dyslexia is not a disadvantage. It's in fact a huge advantage, because you have strengths across the range of fusion skills. And so for me, I think it's a great time for that. I also think that we're seeing that in the emergence of creativity and culture being applied to service design, not just to product. And so, complex problems. So, for example, one of the projects that I know has been investigated through a creative service design approach is how to make prisoners on probation finish the probation period. The systems that we've got haven't worked. And what we need to now look at is actually, if you bring the arts and culture into that process, if you take creative thinking into that process, you suddenly see very different results. And that reduces reoffending rates, because it effectively enables those prisoners to engage more. Coincidentally, about a third of prisoners have neurodiversity. And so a different approach is netting really positive results. So I think we can look at these examples and you see, now has the school system caught up with that? I think not on a large scale. But we still know, for example, that people with autism, young people with autism, have the worst employment statistics of any group within the UK society. So we've not yet managed to convince enough employers. We've not yet managed to convince, get our skills education right, so that it's able to really pick up those skills and have those skills transferred into the workplace. And there are some companies that are really shining a light with great progress, but it needs that sort of broader adoption for everyone.
A lot more still to be done. We're into the final sort of four and a bit minutes, but I wanted to bring Maggie and Katya in on this point. Maggie, do you want to? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry, I had a band playing outside. One of the things we're doing at the Dyslexic Summit is looking at, appreciating dyslexic skills. And one of the things we're celebrating is LinkedIn, sort of the huge network, is actually listing dyslexic skills as a talent in your jobs, so you can search as part of your job search. And so I think it is sort of readdressing and letting sort of people who are neurodiverse shine a light on there are challenges, but we have lots to offer. And I remember going through the school system, and my daughter had an experience the other day where she told someone she was dyslexic, and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll speak more slowly." And the one thing she doesn't need is anyone slowly. So I think it is a matter of education and public education, but also in schools. My daughter's school is very good, and they support her, and they can see sort of that she is amazingly creative as a dyslexic. So I think we need to get that and infiltrate it out across the world, so teachers recognise the dyslexic traits, support them where there are challenges, and actually let them excel where they're really good.
Fantastic, thank you. And Katya, very quickly, get some room.
Yes, I'll be brief as we're running out of time. Well, I would like to say that the Italian Cultural Institute is thinking very much about access and diversities. And in fact, one of the most exciting programs that we're supporting this year, and we're currently in discussions with the Arts Council to carry on and to expand it in future years, is supporting a dance company that where dances performed by less able dancers, and this is one of the most exciting programs that we are supporting this year. But of course, in terms of the big building that we are, and the one of the things that exercises us right now is the removal of physical barriers for less able audiences, and that's still something that is very much a part of our agenda on how to make the actual physical space that we are more accessible to a broader range of people.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Very sadly, I think that means we're running out of time, but it's been a really fascinating discussion. I hope everyone feels that we've had the time and the space, the headroom or the Denkraum to have a really interesting, challenging discussion today. I know we could have gone on for much longer, but it really does, for me, underline the importance of having an accessible, inclusive and lifelong creative education. That's why I'm so pleased that the Rome Declaration prioritises education and culture as something that culture ministers around the world ought to be thinking about, but not just individually and not just as ministers, but together in dialogue. So I look forward to continuing this discussion with thank you again to our three fantastic panelists. Thank you to everybody who's joined us for the call today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I look forward to meeting many of you at the Edinburgh International Cultural Summit in August. Thank you very much, and have a very good day.